Soylent Green is people! We gotta stop them somehow!
I still remember the first time when I was only 12 that I skipped school to see Soylent Green. The film terrified me. On the screen was a city sweltering with heat bodies sprawled across the floor, trash piled into mountains, and people breathing as if they were about to suffocate. Back then, I understood nothing about population explosion, resource depletion, or the greenhouse effect. I only saw a world that was too crowded, too filthy, too stifling. Then, many years later, when I was older and watched it again, I realised that the most haunting aspects of Soylent Green lie in things that are much smaller. A rare meal shared between the two main characters that feels more like a funeral. A woman treated as part of the apartment's furnishings, an accessory that can be traded or discarded like property. And an old man, nearly deaf, still standing in the right place, delivering the right lines, while no one knows he is slowly dying of cancer. Today, we will peel back each layer of that murky green haze to uncover 20 secrets that Soylent Green has hidden for more than half a century. 20. When Hollywood stole a warning and left behind a scream. There is a truth. It took me a long time to accept when revisiting Soylent Green, this film did not begin the way we usually think it did. It was not born from the twist of people eating people. It began with a quiet 1966 novel bearing an almost desperate title, Make Room, Make Room. New York in 1999 is overcrowded. The central character is not a heroic detective, but Andy Rush, an utterly ordinary man trapped in the slow suffocation of a city so crowded it can no longer breathe. No one eats anyone. No one screams the truth. There is only a world dying gradually from overpopulation. Then Hollywood stepped in. They transfused the book with new blood. They took a cold warning and turned it into a shock. They gave the story a scream for audiences to remember. When he saw the finished film, Harry Harrison was furious. To him, that twist cheapened the real terror population explosion, depleted resources, and suffocation without the need for gore. But for audiences, Charlton Heston's scream became legendary. It outlived the book itself. It completely obscured the original source. For Harrison, it was a wound. For Hollywood, it was history. 19. Edward G. Robinson. When a Hollywood legend quietly spoke his final words without anyone knowing. Do you remember the first time you watched Saul Roth choose euthanasia in Soylent Green? We see only a weary old man lying down. Gentle music rises. Images of forests and oceans drift across the screen like a luxurious dream of a world long lost. But no one knew that the man lying there knew he was about to die. Edward G. Robinson had once been one of Hollywood's toughest faces. A gangster who didn't need to draw a gun to weigh down the entire frame. But by the time Robinson stepped onto the Soylent Green set, that power was already beginning to fracture. Robinson was almost deaf. Every scene was a silent struggle. He relied on hearing aids, discreet hand signals, and the patience of the entire crew just to know where he was standing and what he was supposed to say. But there was one thing Robinson hid from everyone: he was slowly dying of cancer. He kept coming to the set, taking his mark, and working as if it were the last thing he still had control over. Then came Saul Roth's euthanasia scene, a moment the film calls a humane ending. When the camera rolled, Robinson was not acting. He was preparing himself. Charlton Heston stood beside him and broke down in tears. Years later, Heston admitted that he was mourning a friend, one he did not yet know was about to be lost. 12 days later, Edward G. Robinson died. Soylent Green became his 101st film and his last. When audiences watch that scene, they think they are witnessing science fiction about a brutal future. In reality, they are witnessing a real farewell of a human being, an artist preserved forever in the dim light of a strip of film. 18. A rare meal, the most human moment of all. In the middle of a film crowded with pushing bodies, shouting voices, filth, and a sense of desperation that seems to seep through the screen, Soylent Green suddenly stops at a very strange place, a dinner. Robert Thorne and Saul Roth sit facing each other in a cramped room. On the table are things so simple they are almost trivial: a piece of beef, a few apples, a plate of salad. In our world, it would be an unremarkable meal. In theirs, it is a luxury, something that exists only in memory. Edward G. Robinson, who in real life was already nearly exhausted at that point, raises his glass and toasts to life. A very small line, very gentle, and not in the script. No one asked him to say it. He said it himself, as if he knew those simple words might be among his last spoken in front of the camera. Charlton Heston does not reply with anything eloquent, just a slow look, a very quiet chew, a man tasting real food again after years of living in artifice. His face doesn't need to act. It feels like the moment when a person suddenly remembers that he once lived instead of merely existing. Because of that improvised moment, the scene hurts in a way that is hard to describe. It becomes a farewell feast in the film, a goodbye between two friends. In real life, a farewell from an actor to life itself is 17, when women are no longer people but attachments to an apartment. There is a detail in Soylent Green that many people skim past the first time they watch it. Not because it is minor, but because it is so cold. In that world, the wealthy do not just have air conditioning, clean water, and private space. They also have something called, in a chillingly emotionless term, furniture. Young women are assigned to apartments as part of the lease to be used, traded, or left behind when no longer needed. No one beats them. No one ties them up. There is no explicit violence. And that is precisely what makes it more terrifying than anything else. Lee Taylor-Young and Paula Kelly do not play their roles as victims in the usual way. They do not scream. They do not violently resist. They exist in the film through empty looks and soft-spoken replies, as if they have already accepted that they are no longer human. No need to eat people, just turn people into objects. For many viewers, this is the most horrifying vision in Soylent Green. Not because of blood, not because of the twist, but because it shows something frighteningly familiar when a society begins to treat human beings as property. Anyone can be labelled, priced, and shelved. 16. The role Charlton Heston only got after others turned it down. Today, it is hard to imagine Soylent Green without Charlton Heston. But the truth is, he almost wasn't in the film at all. When MGM began casting, they wanted a tough modern face, someone carrying the smell of gunpowder and the exhaustion of the era. The first name they called was George C. Scott, fresh off Patton, all fire and authority. Scott refused. Burt Lancaster was contacted next intense heavyweight, and he refused as well. The project drifted. Its future looked uncertain. And then Charlton Heston stepped in almost as a last option. At the time, Heston was synonymous with Moses, parting the Red Sea with Ben-Hur on his chariot. He embodied faith heroism stories larger than life, but he wanted to escape all of that. Robert Thorne does not save the world. He is just an exhausted cop clawing his way through corruption in a system already rotten. And that was precisely what made Heston realise this was the role that would allow him to shed the halo and become a man being crushed by survival. Ironically, the film so often remembered as bleak and bare-boned gave Heston one of the most political performances of his life. A man drowning in the rubble of tomorrow, fully aware that he will not save anyone. 15. A line that escaped the screen. I still remember my high school graduation in the early 1980s. When a classmate was called up to receive his diploma, he suddenly shouted into the microphone in front of the stage, "Soylent Green is people." Only a few of us clapped and laughed because we understood the reference. That is the strange power of Soylent Green. At first, it was just a line of dialogue. Then it escaped cinema. It became a protest slogan, a running joke on The Simpsons, a shorthand for corporate betrayal. MGM even printed fake cans of Soylent Green as PR props never seen in the film, and they gradually became rare collectibles. By 2025, that line is still alive online at auctions in Halloween costumes, even at climate protests. Very few twists manage to live that long. Soylent Green is not just 1970s sci-fi. It is a howl of rage wrapped in pulp. From Edward G. Robinson's quiet farewell to Charlton Heston's desperate scream, the film gives the future a face that is far too human to forget. 14. The future. New York filmed from the very real nightmare of Los Angeles. When watching Soylent Green, we believe we are seeing New York in the year 2022. A city suffocating from overcrowding, smog, garbage, bodies sprawled across floors and sidewalks. But not a single frame of that was filmed in New York. It was all Los Angeles. Los Angeles in the early 1970s, when the smog crisis reached its peak. When the sky was no longer blue. When the air was so thick that even sunlight seemed filthy. The filmmakers didn't need much imagination. They simply had to film what was already there. The piles of trash along the streets were real. The packed crowds were real. The exhausted people standing in the background were not a fictional future. They were the present pushed to its limits. That is why the illusion created by the film feels so powerful. Viewers can almost feel the heat, the suffocation, the pressure of a city with no room left for privacy. Soylent Green did not build a dystopia out of imagination. It took one from real life and pushed it one step further. 13. The greenhouse effect, an early warning from Soylent Green. In the early 1970s, if you watched a disaster movie, you knew what to expect. Nuclear bombs, poison clouds, plagues, earthquakes tearing cities apart. The enemy always came from outside a collision. A sudden catastrophe, an apocalypse, you could hear explode. Soylent Green does not do that. It doesn't look down at the ground. It looks up at the sky and says that what is killing us is not an explosion, but heat. In a very brief, easily overlooked scene, Robert Thorne casually states the truth, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The greenhouse effect, year-round heat, dead crops, poisoned oceans. Just an exhausted man saying out loud what everyone is already living through. In 1973, the greenhouse effect existed almost exclusively in scientific journals. Climate change was not yet a headline. There were no charts, no global conferences, no slogans. And because of that, when the line was spoken in theatres, it passed quickly. Audiences heard it and forgot. Looking back, the line is chilling. Soylent Green does not try to prophesy. It simply connects the very logical dots of greed, industrialization, and indifference and leaves viewers to face the result themselves. All it takes is one human being standing in a ruined city shouting a truth that the world would need half a century to finally name. 12. The ending that almost got changed. There is one thing Hollywood fears more than box office failure, an ending with no hope. And Soylent Green is exactly that kind of ending. When the completed script landed on the table, MGM hesitated. The final scene was too heavy, too bleak, too cruel. Robert Thorne screams the truth. Soylent Green is people and then collapses in blood. Studio executives wanted to soften it. Let Thorne live. Let him reveal the truth to the public. Give audiences the feeling that once the truth is known, things will change. Charlton Heston refused. He understood that the film's weight lay precisely in that hopelessness, in the truth being screamed out only to fall into a system that is already broken. A world that hears it and still goes on grinding people into food. Heston threatened to walk away if the ending were softened. Director Richard Fleischer stood by him. And because of that, Soylent Green retained one of the most haunting endings in film history. That scream still echoes today because it saves no one. It offers no comfort. It does not close the story. It sends audiences out of the theatre with a deeply uncomfortable question. If we know everything and still do nothing, isn't that even more terrifying? 11. A poster that screamed louder than the film itself. Some films need to be watched to be understood. Others only require a single poster to make you feel suffocated. The Soylent Green poster belongs to the latter. A panicked crowd, human bodies being scooped up like trash, bulldozers crushing through the streets, making no distinction between the living and the dead. Everything compressed into a single image that looks like the front page of a tabloid on the day the world ends. That was no accident. It was intentional. Artist John Soley painted the poster with the same lurid energy he brought to Shaft Piranha and countless 1970s pulp films. His brush didn't just advertise a movie, it sold a feeling panic loss of control and a society devouring itself. Many people said the poster was too much, that it didn't represent the film. But in retrospect, it did exactly one thing right. It said bluntly what the film said slowly, that people in that world do not die from a single explosion. They die from being gathered up, processed and discarded like waste. Over time, the hysteria captured in that poster helped cement Soylent Green's reputation on par with its final twist. Today, original prints have become prized collectibles. They stand as proof of an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, a single image can scream louder than 1,000 lines of dialogue. 10. A title that almost turned a nightmare into a TV joke. Few people know that Soylent Green almost died not because of its content, but because of its title. Make Room. Make Room, the original title of the novel, sounds like a plea. A blunt command in a world already so crowded there is no space left for anyone. It was a title perfectly aligned with the story's spirit, suffocating cold and without escape. But MGM hated it. They feared audiences would associate it with Make Room for Daddy, a popular family sitcom whose revival had just ended in 1970. A bleak, dystopian film carrying a name that evoked Danny Thomas and canned laughter. To MGM, that was a disaster, so they changed it. They latched onto the mysterious food wafers in the film and chose a name that sounded scientific odd and shock-ready: Soylent Green. A warning about suffocating overpopulation was replaced by a sensational marketing hook. Time, however, played a cruel joke. The name, once dismissed as cheap, gradually became one of the most chilling titles in cinema history. 9. The Blackwing 602 pencil and the last thing humanity loses. In the middle of a film filled with screams, garbage, and people treated like livestock, there is a strangely peaceful moment. Thorn brings Saul a few scavenged items, old books, scraps, relics of a dead world, and among them are several pencils. Most viewers don't notice, but if you look closely, you can see the flat eraser and distinctive gold ferrule of the Blackwing 602. For those who care about words and creativity, it isn't just a pencil, it's a symbol. John Steinbeck wrote with it. Chuck Jones sketched with it. Truman Capote. Quincy Jones, all of them, once held a Blackwing in their hands. In Soylent Green, the pencils are never explained. They simply lie there, small, silent. Decades later, when Blackwing ceased production and collectors began paying hundreds of dollars for a single old box, that detail gained new weight. In a film about everything humanity has lost: forests, oceans, food, dignity, the pencils remind us that the last thing to disappear is always imagination. Because when people are reduced to mere survival, they no longer have time to write, to draw, or to dream. 8. When marketing itself became another layer of deception, the marketing of Soylent Green faced a difficult problem. How do you sell a film without revealing the one thing that truly matters? MGM chose misdirection. Posters and trailers screamed about panicked crowds, bulldozers scooping up bodies, a world running out of food. All of it was true, but there wasn't a single hint of people eating people. No ambiguous phrasing. No whispered Soylent Green is people. The strategy was brutally effective. Audiences walked into theatres expecting a bleak dystopian film and walked out having been punched straight in the conscience. Years later, looking back at those posters, they feel like yet another layer of deception, relics of an era when marketing thrived on secrecy. But that deliberate silence preserved the power of the twist, allowing it to endure to this day. 7. A film that didn't start a trend but planted the seeds of a generation of sci-fi. Soylent Green had no toys, no sequels, and never became a box office phenomenon. like Planet of the Apes. But its shadow spread quietly. Directors who came of age in the 1970s carried that memory with them. Overcrowded streets, smog-choked skies, and the idea that humanity's greatest enemy is not aliens, but itself. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner pushed that vision to its extreme, a neon city drowning in pollution and despair. Logan's Run continued the obsession with population control and institutional sacrifice. Silent Running and Westworld share the same DNA dystopias with moral weight, not just visual spectacle. Soylent Green proved that sci-fi could be political, that pulp could be prophetic, and that thrillers could function as warnings. Half a century later, that legacy still haunts every bleak city ever put on screen. 6. A film that should have vanished but refused to die. Released during a period of upheaval at MGM's Soylent Green, had a budget of only about $4 million, modest even by 1970s standards. Expectations were low, yet the film grossed more than $20 million worldwide, not a blockbuster, but enough to survive during the studio's dark years. Then came the awards, a Nebula Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. Later, a Saturn Award for Best Science Fiction Film. Early criticisms that it was too dark gradually lost their force as time passed. The further it drifted from its release, the more seriously Soylent Green was taken. Today, a mere whisper of Soylent Green is enough for people to understand. Against all early odds, the film endured lean, furious, and impossible to forget. 5. The film you watched is not the film that was originally shot. The theatrical version of Soylent Green is not entirely the film Richard Fleischer originally envisioned. Post-production quietly reshaped it. In the original script, Thorne and Saul's apartment was not occupied by just the two of them. Another family was crammed in as well, crying children arguing adults' bodies pressed against one another to emphasize the feeling that there was no space left to live. MGM found it too heavy, too suffocating, and cut it. Other changes were more subtle. Mike Henry, who played the policeman Kulo, spoke with a distinctly southern accent. Nothing like New York, so all of his dialogue was dubbed. MGM also brought in Francis Borman, president of the American Environmental Protection Association, as a consultant to make the details of water shortages, food rations, and everyday brutality feel more scientifically accurate. 4. A video game flickering in the middle of the apocalypse. In a world of hunger, smog, and despair, Soylent Green contains a very small moment almost out of rhythm. A young woman stands playing a neon-lit machine Computer Space. Released in 1971, Computer Space was the first commercial arcade video game designed by Nolan Bushnell before he founded Atari. It failed because it was too early, too difficult, too unfamiliar to the public, and precisely because of that, its cameo carries a strange significance. Soylent Green accidentally became the first feature film ever to show a video game on screen, a fragment of the future glowing awkwardly inside a story about the end of civilization. While the world collapses from a lack of food and water, people still stand in front of a machine to play. 3. The crowds weren't acting, they were living like that. The suffocating streets of Soylent Green are not just cinematic illusion. To create that feeling, the filmmakers hired locals from Skid Row, Los Angeles, many of them homeless living on the margins of society. They didn't need to act exhausted. Bodies slumped on stairways, empty stairs, hardened, faces, all of it was real. The camera simply recorded it, and that is what dissolves the line between performance and life. The future in the film no longer feels fictional. It looks exactly like the city outside the theatre. Audiences don't see the year 2022. They see the present pushed a few steps further. 2. A film about decline born in the middle of decline. When Soylent Green was released in 1973, MGM was no longer the glorious empire of The Wizard of Oz or its radiant musicals. The studio was selling off backlot land, auctioning its film library just to stay afloat. The old shine had faded. In that context, a bleak dystopian film arrived like a dirge. The The decline was not only on screen, it echoed in real life. A studio that once defined the Hollywood dream was now telling a story of hunger scarcity and organized death. That is why Soylent Green carries a very particular sadness. It is not just a warning about the future, it is a confession of the present. One of the final breaths of the old MGM, where on-screen the world collapses, and off-screen the empire that made it is falling apart as well. 1. When 2022 stopped being science fiction, in 1973, when Soylent Green reached theatres the year 2022, sounded very far away. A date distant enough for viewers to feel safe thinking, "This isn't about us." It was science fiction, a warning then forgotten. But time doesn't stand still. As the years passed, the images in the film felt less and less imagined. Cities overcrowded to the point of suffocation, poverty spilling into the streets, food controlled by corporations, prolonged heat, clean water becoming a privilege, fresh produce turning into a luxury. When the real year 2022 arrived, headlines began using the very words the film had once invented: climate crisis, fears of overpopulation, global food shortages, protests, riots. The images on screen suddenly looked disturbingly like what we saw every night on the news. When audiences rewatched Soylent Green in 2022 itself, that number was no longer the future. It was the present. And the chill no longer came from the twist, but from a colder realization. This film is no longer talking about tomorrow, it is talking about us. Perhaps the most frightening thing about Soylent Green doesn't lie in its famous line, nor in the twist that has become legendary. It lies in a very slow, smouldering feeling that only appears when you revisit the film years later. If this movie still sends a chill down your spine, leave a comment about the detail that impressed you the most. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss our next videos.